Hi, my name is Oli Yamada, and I am doing my project on development in Papua New Guinea. So, Papua New Guinea refers to the east side of the island of New Guinea, which is along with 50 smaller island nations along its eastern coast. The west side is occupied by Indonesia and is used for military purposes. The majority of the population is Melanesian, but there are about 840 different languages and many individual cultures. Asian and European settlers used Papua New Guinea as a trading post since the 1800s, but it was not until the 1940s that large-scale colonization began. The economy relied heavily on agriculture and cultivation of cocoa, coffee, and copra. In the 1970s, Australia, who owned PNG, or Papua New Guinea at the time, began the mining industry. They sold leases for gold and copper. But in 1875, the government of Papua New Guinea rallied together for independence and they won. Papua New Guinea became an independent nation. But the mining leases were honored in order to continue receiving financial gains and to continue receiving royalties from the companies for the mining. The capital and government are located on the big or main island of New Guinea. Many of the money flows through the main island and does not filter to the smaller islands. Because of the diverse cultures throughout Papua New Guinea, there is no unified government that is recognized by the entire nation. So it's difficult for elected government officials to enforce laws and policy to all of its citizens. It's also easy for citizens to take matters into their own hands without government control. So some consequences of development in Papua New Guinea since becoming a somewhat developed nation. For one, there's uneven distribution of funds. So there are no regulations when it comes to mining procedures. The government, who is supposed to enforce laws or hand out fines, or are receiving compensation to quote unquote look the other way or to turn their cheek. It allows mining companies to save money by cutting corners. It's led to environmental degradation, pollution of fertile agriculture lands, and pollution of waterways. It's also displaced many of the indigenous people by polluting their lands and making them inhabitable. It denies access to employment. So foreign countries who own the mines bring in their own workers. So there's a high volume of migration which intermingles with the native populations. Local people are denied access to jobs because the mining companies owned by different countries will bring in their own workers. They are also forcefully removed from the lands which they farm and are unable to make a living. They're displaced to other areas in order for the mining areas to be constructed. The next one is increased migration. So as the mining companies from other countries get bigger, they bring in their own workers instead of hiring the local population because the rate is cheaper and they can get away with a lot more because it's their own citizens. Compensation shortfalls. So money is given to the government to compensate for land loss and to improve in the infrastructure of the people affected by mining. But money is either never given or disappears through corruption throughout the government through people being paid off for various things. Another problem is human trafficking. So foreign countries will force citizens to work in mines for poor wages and poor living conditions in order for them to make a greater profit. The less wages they have to pay or the less amount of benefits they have to give their workers creates more of a profit, and so it works in their favor to get their own citizens who won't necessarily grumble about being mistreated or mishandled. Another part of human trafficking is that indigenous women are sold by their families to pay off debts as a result of relying on government subsidies or relying on mining companies. So they'll sell their daughters to pay off a debt or to receive compensation in order to make a living. They're also sold to mining camps to be used for services so that the workers, I guess, have higher morale by having women readily available for their benefit and their use. But there have been recent changes, especially through some of the articles I've been reading. In the past year or so, the government has turned over and they've been hiring officials that are against corruption and trying to improve the way of life for their citizens. So they're rallying to create new agreements with the companies that are coming in who are extracting resources to ensure that monies are going to the appropriate places. In these same agreements, Papua New Guinea is mandating that they employ so much percent of the workforce to indigenous peoples. Monies are also being allocated into the healthcare system to address pressing health concerns. Papua New Guinea has some of the highest rates of HIV and AIDS and tuberculosis. So money goes towards facilities to administer vaccines and provide care and education for the ones that are already sick. They also have given a lot of the money, the government has given a lot of money to these patients, to their families, to prevent many of these diseases from being passed around. New agreements from these mining companies has also allocated money to improve infrastructures such as schools, stores, sanitation facilities, and to improve agriculture land conditions or prevent them from becoming degraded. Papua New Guinea participates in a program that offers free education to their students, and many of the monies that were supposed to go to that program were not being allocated correctly. And now they're realizing that through these new government changeovers, more students are getting better facilities, they're getting running bathrooms and more school supplies, which is improving the education of their people. And lastly, with the economic distributions, money has actually been going back into the government, back into the people, back into their infrastructure and such to improve the overall well-being of the indigenous people and kind of rectifying or making right some of the problems that's been happening so that there's less tension and less uprising. So in conclusion, consequences of development in Papua New Guinea have happened swiftly, where it has taken hundreds of years for some countries and economies to end up in the position that Papua New Guinea is in. It has happened in a short amount of time, about 40 years. The whirlwind of changes are the people are still learning how to cope with those changes. They're learning how to stand up for their rights. The government is switching over and they're taking the necessary steps to create a more positive environment for their indigenous people. Through the efforts of these indigenous people who were educated enough to band together and to create a stand and stand against these injustices by the government and outside entities, they've gained enough momentum and support from world organizations, and many of them are helping their government to run correctly and create a more unified state amongst the Papua New Guinea population. I hope that these efforts will continue and that we will continue to read that more and more people, indigenous people, are benefiting from all the wrongdoings that has happened. And I'm thankful that at least I'm reading good things and not just all the bad things that are happening. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and thank you for watching.